Welcome, everyone, to the January 16th, 2025 Harbor Commission regular meeting. I am Chairman Adam Stanwyck, and let's start off with a roll call.
Commissioner Anderson?
Here.
Commissioner Cohen?
Here.
Commissioner Ford?
Here.
Commissioner McRae?
Here.
Commissioner Nelson?
Here.
Commissioner Stedman?
Here.
Chair Stanwyck.
Here. Thank you. Director Wiltshire, do we have any changes to the agenda this evening?
Chair Stanwyck, no changes tonight.
Great. Mr. Lopez, I believe we do have a speaker slip for general public comment.
Yes, we have one speaker slip submitted, John Payne.
Hey, Mr. Payne.
Good evening, Chairman Stanwyck, Harbor Commissioners, and Waterfront staff. I'm just here again, as I was in November, reintroducing myself and highlighting my company, Ocean Air, down in the Santa Barbara Harbor. It's been there for many decades. I've been operating it for 10 years. My lease will be coming up pretty soon. I haven't read it, but anyway, I'd love to see you guys down in the harbor sometime. That's why I gave you a little blurb about our company. If you ever find yourself in the harbor, give us a call and check out our operations. And as you'll see in that handout, some of our goals for this year are hopefully to find a little more showroom space and some increased administrative space. As our company has been growing, we have really good top line revenue, but sometimes it's hard to make the profit part of it stick. And that is, I'm that size business where you're right in between, where everyone's like scale, 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 but I don't think I can do it. So I want to maximize what we have and build it. But if you ever come and see our showroom, it's quite, well, it's quite lively. It's very full. And so if we can figure out a way to get a little more space, which is the final frontier here in Santa Barbara, that'd be wonderful. Anyway, Happy New Year, and thanks for your time.
Thanks, Mr. Payne. Ocean Air is a great business, so yeah. Okay, we'll move on to the work group reports. Vice Chair.
Hello. First of all, are there any other work groups other than strategic planning that have a report tonight? No. Okay, well, I do, and so here goes. The strategic planning work group of Commissioners Stedman, Nelson, and myself, we met on Thursday, January 9th, and the meeting was focused on the next steps in the process of 2025. As was reported and approved by the Harbor Commission in October, there was an agreement that the Harbor Commission must be at least at first knowledgeable about the laws, the policies, and the practices that guide the waterfront and the Harbor Commission, as well as have a clear understanding of the roles and responsibilities of the Harbor Commission. So to this end, work has begun in earnest on a data dashboard with content suggested by our work group and the waterfront team. It's a work in progress, but Director Wiltshire's first draft will give you an idea of where we're going with it. It's a user-friendly kind of a placemat, if you will, that gives us an easy reference to that we'll use during our meetings. will also be online, so numerous links will be added that may be of interest to you to look up at any time. The goal is to make it very user-friendly. And we see it as a constantly changing document as our needs and information changes. But ultimately, it could truly be a visual roadmap of the final product of a waterfront strategic plan. So this is an example of Director Wilshire's first go-round, and you can see that there are a number of different areas that include for example, the local coastal program relevant sections, the council priorities, the waterfront enterprise fund revenues and expenditures. And this is a first draft. Thank you so much for doing this, Director Wilshire. And we're excited about that work. Also, I would just add that Commissioner Nelson is doing some research into other harbor strategic plans related to, that are similar to Santa Barbara, and they're visioning for what they would like to have happen at their harbors, and we're excited to soon be able to make some recommendations of next steps on that to the Harbor Commission too. In our meeting, I want to emphasize that we are committed to, as part of this planning, engaging our various stakeholders in the process, and I would say this was also approved by the Harbor Commission in October, in order to ensure that many voices are heard as we plan. Our work group will meet again in February, and I just want to invite all of you to reach out to any of us if you have thoughts or suggestions or et cetera as we go forward. And we were delighted that the Commission expressed unanimous agreement that strategic planning should be a top priority this year. Thank you. And now we go forward with the...
Yep, we'll move forward with the consent calendar. Yeah, thanks for the update on the strategic planning. I know a lot's gone into that, and I know the dashboard was something we had in mind for 2025, so I'm glad we have a first draft for that. So thanks to all those involved. Okay, we'll move on to the consent calendar. Item number 1, approval of the minutes. Mr. Lopez, can you please read the recommendation for item number 1?
This is item 1, approval of the minutes. Recommendation that Harbor Commission waive further reading and approve the minutes from the regular meeting of November 21st, 2024.
Great, thank you. Do we have any questions from the commissioners regarding the consent calendar, or do we have a motion to approve?
I'll make that motion.
Second.
Great, we have a motion and a second to approve the consent calendar. Mr. Lopez, can you please do a vote for us?
Yes, this is a motion by Commissioner Nelson, seconded by Commissioner Stedman to approve the consent calendar. Commissioner Anderson.
Yes.
Commissioner Cohen.
Yes.
Commissioner Ford.
Aye.
Commissioner McCrae.
Abstain.
Commissioner Nelson.
Aye.
Commissioner Stedman.
Yes.
And Commissioner Stanwyck.
Yes.
Chair Stanwyck.
Yes, thank you.
And that motion passes unanimously with Commissioner McCrae abstaining.
Great, thanks, Ms. Lopez. Okay, we'll move on to new business. Item number 2, the Breakwater Restaurant rent deferment request.
Good evening, Chair Stanwyck, Commissioners, members of the public. My name is Cesar Barrios. I am the Waterfront Business Manager. And today I bring to you a proposal for a 3-month rent deferment for the Breakwater Restaurant. This is due to their proposed exterior and interior renovation, which includes a new entrance. We'll go over some details here as I move on. So to give you some background, so located at 107 Harbor Way, the Breakwater Restaurant opened its doors in the early 1980s, 1984 to be more exact. Since then, the restaurant has been a valued tenant and integral part of the Santa Barbara Harbor community. In December of 2024, Mr. Dudley Michael, the current owner, and he took ownership mid last year, approached the waterfront department with plans to remodel part of their 4,053 square foot space, interior and exterior. So as I mentioned, their plan is to remodel the interior, add new working spaces in the back, replacing an old freezer that's going to become more of a prep area and a refrigerator as opposed to a freezer. And also, the most significant change or proposal will be the new entrance on the east side of the building. And this is the current patio. So as you can see here, that's when you walk on the main walkway there by the harbor. They have their front and center patio, but their main entrance is to the north. And for those who are not familiar where my cursor is, that's where the main entrance is. And then they have a second, normally it's more of an exit on this side. And that's their main entry to the actual building. So what they are proposing is to move that entrance to the east side. And the goal with that is that it would enhance the accessibility from patrons that just come down the harbor, going on the main sidewalk, as heading towards the museum, Brophy's, and then eventually the West Marine area. They can easily access the main entrance. So because of the extensive nature of the repairs and the temporary closure of the restaurant, the owner is proposing a rent deferment to help manage their financial obligations during this time. On that regard, upon review, the Waterfront Department granted a 3-month rent deferment that would take effect starting February 2025 of this year, 2025, and last through the end of April. The owner applied for several permits, so following up with him, it appears that there'll be permits available within the next month to start this project, which it's been in the plan since last year when the new owner took possession of this lease. So the rent during this time period will not be waived. It will be instead amortized through from May 2025 through the end of the lease, which is December 2030. So that amount of rent will be parted out through the end of that lease. And that's a very standard practice that we've done very recently with a lot of the businesses that have undergone construction and asked for a deferment. So the total rent to be deferred during this period will be $30,956, and that's just the totality, not just 1 month. That's just the totality, and that will be divided within the remaining months of the lease. The owner has the option to pay that up front, so there's no really there is a minimum payment monthly, but if he chooses to pay that up front, as opposed to having it added to the standard base rent, he can do so. So with that, staff, we request that the Harbor Commission recommend the proposed rent deferment plan to the City Council, which will take effect in form of a lease amendment. This action will show the goodwill of the department, supporting waterfront tenants who are committing their time and capital to improving the quality and appeal of the waterfront. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Mr. Barrios. We do have a question, Commissioner Nelson.
I support the deferment, but I have questions about process because we made our lease policy the second priority in terms of this year's prioritization. So when we convey a lease to a new owner, which was the case here, correct?
That's correct.
I mean, because even though it's been around since 1980, it was just recently we conveyed it to the new owner. When we do that conveyance, do we get a feel for what the new tenant will do with the property, or we just wait and see?
Chair Stanaway, Commissioner Nelson, most of the time we do, because part of the process to either acquire a new lease or being assigned the lease, but like it was the situation, we do require a business plan from the new prospect tenant. So many times they'll describe and they'll have an idea of expanding either changing the business model as opposed to a menu or even doing renovations, especially if it's an older building, which this is the case.
So in this case, did we require a building plan, and was it indicated that there was going to be a $600,000 renovation?
No, we did not. I mean, we approve the concept of what they're proposing.
Okay.
And then we send them off to building and safety to file the permits, and to go through the permitting process.
Because I was just thinking, because we sort of are in a pro forma approval when an owner negotiates a sale, essentially a sale. It comes to us and we approve it, not matter-of-factly, but we still approve it. Is there any way that before we do an approval like that, we can get a good idea of, one, what's being proposed, the value of what's being proposed, and then two, what the general condition of the building is? I remember we did a similar thing for the Harbor Restaurant, and the tenant that's there now suddenly had monstrous repair bills and that sort of thing. So is there a way that when a conveyance like this happens, or a renewal, we can go in and sort of do an inspection and then find out what's being proposed and how it's being financed and all that? Because we're now in a cycle, it seems, that every restaurant we have are seeking deferrals, all for good reasons, all an investment in public property, all will be paid back. So I'm not being negative about it, as opposed to just trying to know what's going on, the Harbor Commission to know what's going on as soon as possible. That's all.
Thank you.
Great, thanks. Commissioner McCray.
Yes. I have a question with respect to the amortization of that, the 3 months of base rent. So typically what happens with our restaurant tenants, they actually don't end up having to pay the base rent unless there's really funky weather for part of the winter. They end up paying that, the percentage rent instead. So I'm wondering if that amortized amount is tacked on to to the percentage rent as it's amortized over time, or if it just gets absorbed into that so we don't actually see those 3 months rent come back to us.
Commissioner McCray, the percentage rent is based on the established base rent, and then the amortized value is just added to that month's rent. So there's already an established base rent, probably depending on the type of schedule they are with the CPI. But generally, it's not that amortized payment is just a fixed number based on the base rent that was owed from the beginning when the rent was deferred.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think I understand. So we will actually end up recouping the 3 months base rent over time, irrespective of the percentage rent being paid for the rest of those
The intention
months.
is that the tenant will be paying base rent when they're closed because they're not doing any business. So it's just a fixed rate amount of money that's owed back over a certain period of time. And it can really be paid back at any time, but the least flexible terms we offer is amortizing it over the whole duration of the loan. So it's really, or the lease, it's really just a flat rate. All future months are kind of calculated as they go. If they hit their targets, they'll pay percentage rent in future months.
Thank you.
Commissioner Anderson.
Thank you. Did they, before they signed the lease or took over the spot, did they indicate that they're going to be asking for this deferment?
Commissioner Anderson, no, they did not.
No, that's what you asked.
Yeah.
Right.
So we didn't know that there was going to be an deferment for them to undertake 6 months.
But just to add to that, so it is a standard practice for the department to, when a business does a significant investment in the property and they have to shut down because of that construction project, it's an option that we offer to them to deal with the financial obligations during that period.
And I can speak from experience, there's a lot of value and a lot less pressure when you're trying to make changes to a building and not having to pay the rent. So I completely understand where that comes from. But just looking ahead to another discussion that we're going to have on the budget, the property management section in this last 6 months is one of our main shortfalls, and I'd be curious, I imagine we'll get into it, to what percentage of that could have been made up had we not deferred so much rent. I'd be curious to where that is. And, moving it out over a 5-year lease, obviously there's interest implications on that, where if we're just doing an absolute value of $30,000 now, it's going to be worth less when we get it back at the end of the lease. So just thoughts that are coming to mind. I don't think necessarily we should say no by any means. I understand it's our standard practice, but maybe something that we want to consider when we're signing on new leases, saying this has been a standard practice. We're facing a shortfall in our property management section this quarter or this fiscal year, so don't bank on it necessarily every time that you ask for.
Yeah, Commissioner Anderson, we try and be as fair as we can, and so we'd want to levy that across the board. If it's the Harbor Commission's preference to be essentially not provide that benefit to our tenants, we can certainly discuss that and not do it, but we would like to do it evenly and fairly, either as a consistent practice or not, because it becomes very difficult if we're picking and choosing certain ones.
Sure.
We've always done it historically as sort of a nod and a positive benefit to our tenants. There is a financial hit to the waterfront, you're right, like just the concept of interest and money that should be owed, and so it definitely is a benefit to our tenants, but to some degree we want to be favorable and support business and allow them to renovate especially, and so anything that we can do to remove barriers for tenants to improve their facilities is generally a good thing, as opposed to making it harder on them.
I see all that. And then the last question would be, how often do we stick to the 3 months? So obviously, as we all know, construction and permitting in Santa Barbara, hard to put a timeline on that. If in 3 months come and they're only 20% done with their project, or do we similarly say, basically until you're open, we'll defer rent, or do we ever put our foot down at some point?
Generally, it's a 3 months. It's been the standard practice. That's what we put on the table when we are approached with the request. However, things do change, and as you may recall, for the Harbor Restaurant, we deferred 6 months this past year.
Right.
And part of that is somewhat negotiated. We really try and match it to the amount of time that actual construction will occur. We don't want to not be charging rent when they're open for business. It's not a good look, and so up front we kind of get a size and scale of their project, and they can kind of say, hey, we think this is going to take 3 months or 4 months, and so we could kind of tailor it, that deferred rent, to when they're actually boots on the ground working on the building.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thanks, Commissioner Anderson. Commissioner Cohen.
Kind of in the same vein, we've had a few restaurants that have gone through this process, and I'm just wondering, when you see them open back up, and they've obviously put a huge investment into the facility, are you seeing the income or I guess because for the harbor, we receive a portion of income as long as they're making money. I'm not sure exactly how that works, but are you seeing it increase when they're opening their doors? Are we seeing, I know that there was some concern about some of the restaurants and their impact on the budget if they weren't doing well. And I'm just wondering if we're starting to see that, and maybe this is more of a conversation around the budget, but I'm just wondering, when they do this work and open up, are we expecting that to be a much more profitable restaurant? Is that a trend that you've been seeing with the other ones?
Commissioner Cohen, I think in short, yes, that's what we anticipate. I mean, that's what they anticipate from the business side of things too. There's a lot of factors at play. I mean, restaurants all over Santa Barbara are struggling right now, and so it's hard to parse out what has to do with the economy and what has to do with them reopening at maybe an inopportune time. But I think everybody at the table's intention is that when they renovate or do a tenant improvement, that they're going to drive more business to them. A lot of the times we do see increased revenue. So some of our tenants who have gone through this exact process, their revenues are up, and so that's a good thing. Some right now, currently, not the case, and
Okay.
that could be to do with the economy, that could be to do with just less people being out. We'll see in the budget as well, although our parking revenues are neutral, volume and parking at the waterfront has been way down, and so if you use that as a metric for people just being down there, it's less. There's just less people this past year down in the harbor.
Okay. But for the restaurants, I think, did we have 2 last year that closed to renovate that are now open? I know, I can think of 2 off the top of my head, but maybe it was 3. Like, we've seen when they've opened, some yes, some no. Is that what I'm hearing? Okay.
Commissioner Anderson, do you have another question?
Thank you. Yes, I want to speak twice on this one, I guess. Caesar, can you go back, I think it's 2 slides? One more. One more. One more. And even more. And more. And more. Sorry, there's one slide where we said the waterfront had already, this is a procedural question again. On Tuesday, well, I guess we said the waterfront's already granted the deferment on one of the slides.
Yeah, that was miswritten. Our standard process is to bring it to Harbor Commission for an advisory capacity, and then we have to take these to council to approve the lease amendment.
Okay.
So if council ultimately does not approve this amendment, it does not go through, regardless of what staff or what Harbor Commission, where we all weigh in on it.
So instead of already granted, it could say like the Harbor Department is suggesting or moving forward on the agenda.
Yeah, we're in agreeance with it and recommending it to you all to recommend to council.
Thank you.
Thanks. One question I have, I know, is a few feet away from the Breakwater restaurant is the area for the new scuba diving statue. Is there any concerns about 2 construction projects going on at the same time, kind of right next to each other in the harbor?
Good question. The Divers Monument construction project's beginning on Tuesday, so it will likely be ahead of the Breakwater restaurant. Quite honestly, they would have loved to do them simultaneously, because it's kind of just, in the public's mind, it's just one big mess instead of 2. So I don't believe that they'll have their permits in time. The Divers Monument concrete work and base work will probably take 2 to 3 weeks, so they should be wrapped up in early February, and that space will be kind of returned back to its new look. The statue itself won't be placed there until early April. There's going to be a reveal party on April 5th.
Great, thanks. Commissioner McCray?
Yeah, I'm ready with the motion if we're finished with discussion here.
I don't see any further questions. Mr. Lopez, can you please read the recommendation for item number 2?
Yes, the recommendation for item 2 is that Harbor Commission recommend approval by the City Council of a 3-month rent deferment for Breakwater Restaurant to provide financial relief to the tenant while they perform renovations to their leased space.
Great, thank you. Do we have a motion?
Yeah, I move that the Harbor Commission recommend approval to the City Council for a 3-month rent deferment for the Breakwater Restaurant starting in February of this year.
A second.
Okay, we have a second from Commissioner Nelson. Mr. Lopez, could we please do a vote?
Yes, this is a motion by Commissioner McCray, seconded by Commissioner Nelson, as described by Commissioner McCray. Commissioner Cohen.
Yes.
Commissioner Ford.
Yes.
Commissioner McCray.
Yes.
Commissioner Nelson.
Yes.
Commissioner Stedman.
Yes.
Commissioner Anderson.
Yes.
And Chair Stanwyck.
Yes.
And that motion passes unanimously.
Great, thank you. Okay, we can move on to item number 3 of new business. It is the fiscal year 2025 mid-year budget report. And Mr. Lopez, can you please read the recommendation for that as well?
Yes, this is item 3, fiscal year 2025 mid-year budget report. Recommendation that Harbor Commission receive and review a status report on the Waterfront Department fiscal year 2025 mid-year budget revenues and expenditures.
Great, thank you.
Good evening again, Chair Stanwyck, Commissioners, members of the public. Today we'll provide you with a brief mid-year report on fiscal year 2025, which ended December 31st of 2024. However, the data that I'm providing today only includes the months from July through November, since the December figures are still being processed by our finance department. It's early in the year, so we're still waiting to get some of those figures. However, the story overall is pretty similar if the December figures were included here, considering the volumes of business that we did in December. So jumping into our mid-year revenues, so compared to last year, revenues are down just under 3%. This is primarily due to a variance in property management. This program is 9.3% lower than last year at the same time, and this decline is attributed to several factors, including the reduction in revenues from food service and commercial leases, and we attribute this mostly to having a really cold summer. July, August, September were very, very cold considering comparing to previous years. And that had a negative impact on visitors coming down to the waterfront, as well as the economy, which we've seen not just at the waterfront, but overall in the city and other parts of the state facing some challenges. So just to go in a little bit of detail here, following property management on the financial management side, this program consists of investment interest earned on the department's reserves. So the revenue at mid-year is just under 20% compared to last year at the same time. And this category represents the interest income, which varies depending on the department's reserves, like as I just mentioned, and their interest rates provided to by the state. The parking services program experienced a modest revenue increase of 0.5% compared to last year at the same time, so reflecting an almost neutral financial performance. And although parking fees increased by 50 cents this past July 1st, the overall impact of these adjustments was tempered by the cooler summer weather, which likely reduced the number of visitors to the area, as I previously mentioned. And then generally, as a note, parking seems to be a function, it's a good teller of what's going on with our visitors. Normally when parking is down, we also see a decline in the visitor serving leases that we manage. In the marina management revenue, it's up 0.7%. That's just roughly $25,000 over last year. And the slip permit transfer fees are down 28.4%. That's just under $200,000 compared to last year at the same time. And just to give you some scale, we processed 43 slip transfers during this period from June through November. And last year, we did 61 during the same period. Also, the visitor fees are down, and they're down about 4.7%. That's roughly $17,000. It's not a material number considering the size of our budget, but still is another sign that the economy was somewhat slow this beginning of this fiscal year. The good thing is livable fees are up by 2.2%. That's about $1,500. And as I mentioned, the fact that the transfer fees are down, it's a reflection of the state of the economy at this time. Okay, so moving on to revenue projections for fiscal year 25. The department is projecting to end the fiscal year slightly behind the budget revenues. One main factor is an estimated reduction in the property management revenues due to the adverse economic trends that we're seeing, as well as 10 renovation projects that may take several months to complete, which in turn affects the percentage rents received by the department. And also some businesses that are conducting or will conduct renovations this quarter, quarter 3, and quarter 4. Some have already requested deferred rents, and there's a possibility that another business may do that for quarter 4 as well. And again, the idea is to provide the financial relief to these businesses while they're shut down. On that regard, the property management program is expected to finish the year below the the budgeted revenue by minus 2.6%, which includes harbor and wharf food service revenues, having the biggest impact. Primarily, again, due to the economy and deferments. However, we do expect to see a slight improvement in Q4 as the spring, summer weather typically brings more visitors to the area. The financial management program consists of interest earned on the department's reserves, and the interest revenue is expected to increase by 16.7% over the budgeted revenues. However, the number will vary depending on the reserve balances and interest rates. And I would have a slide with our current reserves, but we're on standby from our finance department to provide that number. But once we have that reserves figures, we'll be providing that to you, likely in the upcoming fiscal year 26-27 budget discussions. Okay, moving on to parking services. It's estimated that they'll exceed the budget revenues. Although we had a cool summer and fall weather, we're heading into a generally regarded the slow season, which is between now and in April and May. But we're hoping that beginning late May into June, we'll see a slight increase in visitors and positive weather. Also, the marina management is also expected to come in close to budgeted revenues estimates. Through mid-year, the revenues in the marina management program have remained very steady, primarily due to the monthly slip fees. So they've been very steady. So even though we've had a drop in slip transfers, the slip fees have been positive during this quarter or in the last 2 quarters. So as I mentioned, we've seen a decrease in the slip transfer fees at this time, but we're expecting transfer fees to slightly pick up as we approach the summer months in Q3 and 4. Okay, so moving on to expenditures. This slide shows mid-year actuals expenditures at $9,967,326,000, or 46.79% of the annual budget. This slide includes the encumbrances of just under $1.1 million. In salaries and benefits, we're currently below expenditures, so we're below 50%, which normally is expected at mid-year. And these savings are mainly a result of a position being held vacant, which includes the property management specialist position, as well as a number of hourly positions in parking and facilities. For some background on the rest of these items, for special projects, this includes the cost of the July 4th fireworks and used oil disposal. In capital outlay, these are funds allocated for capital projects, including Stearns Wharf and harbor maintenance, upgrading parking systems, as well as repower the harbor patrol boat. For the non-capitalized transfers, this includes the cost of equipment such as maintenance and parking equipment, the ticket spitters, gates, all the stuff you see down at the harbor, and as well as facilities maintenance that they use on a daily basis. And this item also includes all of our computer hardware. Debt service payments basically are shown as principal and interest. And again, they're front-loaded. As you can see, the percentage number is much higher. Normally, that's the way we budget through this process. So it's pretty common to see a mid-year, these numbers highly elevated. As you can see here, 67% and then 87% for interest. This table shows the Waterfront Department's expenditures by program through November 30th of 2024. So the table does not include the current encumbrances that I pointed out in the previous slide of just $1.1 million, those are the funds that were promised for projects by 2-year contracts at the beginning of the fiscal year. But we have yet to expend them. As illustrated here, all Waterfront Department programs areas are under proposed budget expenditures at mid-year, except facilities and design, which is just over 50%, 52.7%. And this is due to the payments that are front-loaded in the first half of the fiscal year. The department is on track at mid-year, and we anticipate all department programs to be under proposed budget expenditures at the conclusion of fiscal year 2025. And overall, we are on track at mid-year, but we hold the potential to fall behind of the projected budgets, primarily due to the unknown state of the economy and the challenges we're facing with some of our tenants and their tenant rents. So we'll continue to monitor our financial performance closely, and as we start the process for fiscal year, the 2-year budget process, fiscal year 2026 and 2027, which we'll bring to you in the coming months. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Great. Thank you for the presentation, Mr. Barrios. Commissioner McCray.
Yes, Mr. Barrios, thank you for that presentation. So I'm looking at tables 3 and 4, the expenses, and I'm looking at this, and basically it looks like the same expenses, but divided differently in each of those tables by the departments and by what was actually spent on different things. It does not show like the change from the previous year or that percentage variance, and I was hoping to get some kind of sense as to how those expenses were tracking year on year as you do for the income.
Are you interested in a specific expense or overall just?
Basically, are our expenses tracking higher or lower than they have been previously?
Overall, they're tracking slightly lower than they have previously, and we continue to be conservative in our spending and including within our salaries and benefits. We did have a vacant position, the property management specialist, which that position in part was deleted, and then we created a new position that took over that. We have an analyst 3 position that was created that was already part of the department, so we technically converted 1 or 2 positions into 1 by finding efficiencies within that process.
Thank you very much.
Hey, Commissioner McCray, just to add on to that a little bit, the expenditures that we can control within the waterfront, we do a really good job of managing them. We're constantly looking at staffing, but there are expenditures that are a little bit out of our control. Salary and benefits is one of them. That's usually decided by union and city council, and so we can manage the number of positions we have, but not necessarily the salaries. So there may be a net increase there. The big ones, and we'll talk about it a lot at our next budget cycle, is property insurance. That is just escalating at a pretty massive rate. So those show up in our allocated costs. Allocated costs are what we pay to the city for services, IT, our fleet, all of our vehicles, legal services, overhead from our finance department, and insurance. And that insurance is an enormous one. And so that is kind of the pot of expenditures that we're battling when we're trying to balance our fees and revenues. And so we'll get into that into some pretty granular detail with our upcoming budget cycle, because it's a huge portion of our budget and it's essentially dictated to us. We can't necessarily negotiate our insurance rates. It's provided to us. We can't negotiate our salaries as the waterfront. Those are provided to us by unions and council. So like there is a huge portion of our budget that is increasing that we don't have a ton of control over.
Thank you for that clarity, Director Wiltshire. It's super helpful. It's good to know what we might be looking at down the road.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Nelson.
Director Wilshire, when you do a budget, I understand that, there's some things you don't have control over. But one thing you have control over is what positions you fill and what your priorities are for your programs. And so I'm hoping in the budget process, if the insurance is going way out of whack, we're not just going to say, oh my gosh, we got to go and ask for a 5% increase in slip fees again to meet the increased cost of insurance, as opposed to taking a look at the form and function and saying, maybe we shouldn't be doing this, and that would prevent us from having to do another 5% hike in slip fees. Sort of a functional analysis that we have to stop doing something because of the insurance going up, because of bad weather is affecting our food and beverage leases.
Yeah, Commissioner Nelson, I look at that as a core function of my job. So whenever there is a vacant position or a retirement or natural attrition, somebody changing positions, take that very seriously, refilling that position or not. In the short time that I've been here, we have eliminated 3 positions within the waterfront, out of a staff of 40. That's significant. Mm-hmm. So we're constantly evaluating that. But to put things into scale, in my tenure here, our insurance bill has gone from $400,000 to $1.5 million.
Right.
So that's $1 million. That's
No, I'm
that's beyond the scale of saying,
Right.
hey, can we just tighten our belt a little bit? Because we have spent the last 5 years aggressively tightening our belt, and you pay for that in the long run. We can cut capital projects, we can cut staffing, but hopefully staffing is temporary because we want to provide a level of service. Cutting capital feels okay in the short term because you save the dollars, but it has an immediate negative ROI in the future. And so you just need to be really cautious with assuming that we can just continuously make cuts.
No, I'm not challenging what you have to deal with, but I'm just thinking, okay, so for example, I'm aware that there's a reserve that you must maintain. And I think there's a percentage that those reserves have to reflect, correct? I mean, there's so much a contribution every year. Well, suppose we didn't make as great a contribution this year as we did last year. So is that a situation where suddenly the enterprise division is up against what the city administration says has to happen? Or could you actually come forward and recommend that I don't want to make the contribution to reserves that I have for the last 10 years?
City Council sets reserve policy for all departments. They recently reviewed enterprise departments last year. We did that in a way. We said, hey, this harbor preservation fund is a little confusing, it's a little odd. We got rid of it. And so because it was tied to a fixed dollar amount, didn't make a lot of sense. And so we just went through a process where staff and at Harbor Commission's agreed to sort of change the way we look at our reserves. But it's ultimately a council decision if they want to lower those thresholds or require us to have either less or more money on hand in reserve, and those are set in policy.
Yeah, I mean, because all I know is last year in your budget, there were people that were very upset about the increase in their slip fees. And then where do they go? They went to the city council. Well, when the city council makes a decision that says you shall put this much money in reserve, that's creating a situation where you've got no choice but to raise slip fees.
No, correct, and you've been along this ride long enough that you know the levers we have to generate revenue, and they're very few. And you know that we don't have a backstop of the general fund, or we're kind of on our own here. And I can assure you that my message into this coming budget cycle is that we have far more pending expenditures than we have ability to generate revenue.
Okay. Thanks.
Thanks. And just a follow-up question with that. I know we have, in the past, we have specific buckets in the budget, like for the Harbor Patrol boats. Is it possible to create another bucket like that for some kind of future large expense, like the insurance deductible? And just kind of curious, because I know we'll probably be discussing that during the budget work group later on in the next few months, but just kind of wanted to understand, at least for the whole commission, what goes into that process of putting aside money like we did for the Harbor Patrol buckets.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at it historically, there's kind of times of need and storms, and everyone's like, oh, we need more reserves. And then as those monies sit there in reserves, people often question them over time and say, hey, why is all this money sitting here? We should not use them. So I feel like we're at a point right now where there is some pressure for us to hold more reserves on hand, especially with the insurance deductible at Stearns Wharf raising from $250,000 to $1 million to $3 million over a course of like 3 to 5 years. And so that's $3 million that we don't have on hand. So I think it would be really wise for us to discuss at our level and present to Harbor Commission that we figure out how we're going to have $3 million on hand if something were to happen to Stearns Wharf to pay that minimum deductible. And I think it would be prudent to be a separate reserve. Sometimes it handcuffs you a little if you make reserves very specific, because it's nicer if you just have sort of a contingency reserve or an emergency reserve, because then it gives all of us the discretion to say, hey, we just had this big storm that wiped out all of our parking lots, but we can't use the Stearns Wharf reserve. It's almost better to kind of use that as a more of a overarching reserve. But that would be a good discussion for this year's budget cycle.
Great, thank you. Question from Commissioner Cohen.
Thank you. I think I heard you say, Caesar, that expenses were actually trending down, which, did I hear that correct for the waterfront?
In the item that Commissioner Cohen, yes, that's what I said, but in the context of salary savings and benefits in this particular situation, but overall, our costs go up every year. Allocated costs
Every year.
continue to go up
I
every
was
year.
gonna say, because if they're trending down, like,
Right.
you got some magic powers. But at any rate, I'm happy to hear that the items that we can control, that at least we're trying to. It seems like that one of the issues that's come up multiple times is the property management and making sure that some of the businesses that are in the harbor are successful. We've talked about, some sort of partnership with the Chamber of Commerce or with Visit Santa Barbara to help out and to make sure that those businesses are getting the marketing and exposure that they need. I guess I have kind of a two-part question. Are we exploring those options further? Are we members of those organizations? Have we looked at, I know that Visit Santa Barbara has marketing opportunities and like places where you can partner with them. Have we looked at, maybe something along those lines for the harbor? And then my other question is there a marketing director or someone who is in charge of those efforts at the harbor that I'm not aware of?
Yeah, Commissioner Cohen, first off, no, we don't necessarily have like a marketing arm or, that would live with Caesar and his business management program, which is essentially himself and Angela Rodriguez who would kind of handle those functions, really like our tenant relations. To the second part, I think it's a great idea. I mean, I think it would be a great idea to propose something like that in this next budget cycle, to have some funds available for us to work with some local agency who is skilled and trained at doing that, be it Visit Santa Barbara or be it the Chamber of Commerce. We are continuing talks with them. The city as a whole was still looking to put together an RFP for economic development services that we kind of got looped into, but being an enterprise fund, we are a little bit different. And so I think that there would be some benefit from a business point of view for us to set aside some waterfront dollars for marketing or business development or some entity to come support with that. As a side note, if you look at any Visit Santa Barbara publication, Stearns Wharf and the waterfront, without a doubt, are either on the front page or
I've seen it.
somewhere highly visible within that. And so Visit Santa Barbara and the waterfront are great friends for that reason. They always kind of highlight our businesses in the wharf and the harbor itself.
I appreciate that. I've noticed that, and I've wondered if we have, it's such a beautiful photograph, and, if it just said right underneath it, come visit. I think that would be great. I also wanted to ask our resident restaurant expert, Seth. I mean, have you noticed within the restaurant business that the last maybe 6 months or so that it has been slower in town? Or, I mean, is that the conversation amongst?
It's been, for us, it's been specific on which location you're talking about. So the one in the funk zone that's near the harbor does reflect similar to what we see here, like it has been a little slower. That being said, this winter has been a lot better than the last two. So these last few months have been better than they have been the last 2 years. And then just recently this weekend, with the disasters in LA, we've seen this last weekend was much busier than we were used to seeing because there's so many people up here. So this time of year in particular is very hit or miss in terms of when you're busy and when you're not. I was telling Commissioner Nelson before the meeting that the week before Thanksgiving is gangbusters, and then the week after is pretty slow. So it's a hit or miss. And then if it's bad weather the week before Thanksgiving, it's going to be slow too. So we've been fairly fortunate. I feel like this year with the weather. I honestly don't remember the summer. Well, for a restaurant side of things, there hasn't been wet. So I would say the funk zone tells a similar tale to what this is saying.
Okay.
The location that's more surrounded by locals is a different story. It's been more constant.
More constant.
Than what this is showing. So, yeah.
Okay. Good to know. So we're not alone.
Commissioner Cohen, just to add to your first question too, as far as marketing and kind of what we're doing as a department to expose the waterfront, right? So Angela Rodriguez and I are meeting monthly with our Wharf Merchants Association. They have new leadership, and they're very active with Visit Santa Barbara and the Chamber of Commerce. We are actively planning events for the upcoming season, especially on the shoulder months. There's not a lot of concern during the peak summer months, but we're talking fall and this time of the year where it's most needed. We're looking at possibly having a wharf week, bringing back other events that bring the community. We're trying to target our locals that oftentimes feel that the wharf is too busy, so they don't want to come out. So we want to create activities in partnership with the Wharf Merchants Associations and also the Harbor Merchants Association to enhance activities down the harbor and bring more people down.
I think that's all great. Anything you can do to get people to understand that, it's not just tourists, it's community. It sounds like that's what's holding up a lot of our restaurants is, the locals that are going down there. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Vice Chair Ford.
Thank you. First of all, great report. Thank you so much. It's really easy to read and easy to see. But it also just points out for me, and especially this conversation does, of the importance of strategic planning, because we have lots of ideas, but something's got to give, either a vision of increasing revenues or decreasing expenses, obviously. Personally, I'd love to see on the expense side the same kind of column of change from prior year, and hope you'll just consider that going forward. That's it.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll include that table in the upcoming reports.
Thanks. Commissioner Stedman.
Yes, one question on insurance, Director Wiltshire. You said that was an allocated cost?
Yeah, insurance is managed.
Can you describe the structure for that?
The insurance for the city is managed through our finance department and their risk group. And so they are the ones who essentially shop insurance policies, determine what we can insure in-house, what we can insure with third parties. And so they manage that centrally. And those costs are then covered by the departments that the insurance covers.
So the JPA, we're
a party to and Santa Cruz is a party to. How does that fit into this allocated cost process?
It's just like shopping for insurance on the open market. Insuring something like a wharf is really difficult. You can't just go to Geico and insure Stearns Wharf. And so you need to have these conglomerates or JPAs or different entities that will bind together to insure. And so that's just really at the work of our risk division and our finance department, seeking out those insurance relationships for entities that will even insure something like Stearns Wharf. And so when those costs go up, or those insurance entities either, if they raise their deductibles, we can either start looking elsewhere. That pot for something like Stearns Wharf is very small. There's not a lot of entities that will insure Stearns Wharf. So those costs are essentially passed through to us, to the department.
Got it. And finally, to be clear, you can't just go to Geico, huh? So
No.
that's what I thought. You could just watch a TV
The
commercial.
the commercials make it seem simple, but they will not issue a policy for Stearns Wharf.
Thank you.
Great, thanks, everyone. Any more questions on item number 3 of the budget?
Yep.
Oh, Commissioner Nelson.
John made me realize that are there appraisals done? Appraisals of the real estate as well as appraised value, the appraised market value of the leases? In terms of what we would have to cover if Stearns Wharf loses, half the wharf, how do they determine what's covered? And is it low or is it high, or do they actually do appraisals that determine what the values are?
They do. We have a detailed property schedule for every property and asset within the city and the waterfront department. It's a little different with the business entities, so their revenue is on their side. They're also insured, and so they're insured for business loss. But as you can imagine, if there was a catastrophic issue at Stearns Wharf, it would be a complicated situation unwinding that. But we do have property schedules and appraisals for city properties.
Good, thank you.
Okay. Looks like that's all the questions for item number 3. We can move on to item number 4, 2025 Prioritization Workshop Review. Mr. Lopez, can you please read the recommendation for item number 4?
Yes, this is item 4, 2025 Prioritization Workshop Review. Recommendation that Harbor Commission discuss the outcomes and priorities from the January 14th, 2025 Prioritization Workshop and take action as necessary.
Great, thank you.
All right, I'll be leading this presentation. Again, Mike Wilshire, Waterfront Department, Waterfront Director. Let's see. So on Tuesday, 2 days ago, we held our 3rd annual priority setting workshop. So thanks to all those in attendance, the public, and for all 7 harbor commissioners who put in their time and effort and thoughtful discussion. So this priority setting workshop was held in the Waterfront classroom. We discussed a whole host of topics, and we've been doing this for the last couple years now, and just saying up front, it has been extremely helpful for staff to kind of guide and prep for our year to come. So on the next slides, I'll review some of your responses that were gathered using an interactive software platform called Mentimeter. This software was kind of a quick way to gather input on top of your all's discussion, so we can take this time to review some of those. So this first question was just kind of a general question that ranked some topics of interest. So all 7 harbor commissioners provided input. And so this really highlighted some key interest in coastal access, waterfront business and tenants, and tourism. So looking at the top 3 there. Next slide. One of the other major things we discussed, as we did in the past couple priority setting workshops, was really how the Harbor Commission preferred to receive lease actions. So as a practice, we bring every lease activity through the Harbor Commission. The Commission, after some pretty robust discussion, the Commission prefers the approach that we're currently using, which is essentially kind of letting staff have some discretion on whether presenting a lease needs a full presentation or if it just needs a staff report and on a consent calendar. And so just earlier today on item 2, breakwater restaurant, so that would be an example of a full presentation. Caesar put a PowerPoint together as opposed to just having a staff report that gets posted with it. Next slide. So with respect to having guest speakers, so we typically in a given year try and have 2, maybe 3 informational, educational topics, have people from the outside come and present at Harbor Commission. And so this is really helpful for staff because we can tee up some of these folks for future meetings. So looking at kind of the top 3 priorities, so having a speaker from a neighboring harbor, Ventura or Channel Islands, a speaker from the State Lands Commission, and then a technical expert on ocean or environmental impacts in our area. Next slide. So what this will do is this will put staff to work. So we'll take this information, and up on the screen right now are a few examples of some folks that we could come have and present at future Harbor Commission meetings. So we work closely with Todd Mitchell, who's the Deputy General Manager at the Ventura Harbor. About quarterly, they either come up here and have lunch and kind of see our operation, or we go down there and have lunch. The last time we went down there, it was all of our managers, so myself, Nathan, Caesar, and Brian. Really good to kind of see the differences and the similarities of how they do business and how their harbor operates. So could definitely have him come and speak. We've worked with Reed Boggiano with the State Lands Commission in the past, and he'd likely be happy to come back and speak to us about State Lands Commission. He's their Granted Lands Program Manager, so looks after the State Lands Granted Lands. And then working on finding a relevant environmental guest speaker, so could lean on all of you if you guys have any recommendations, or we can kind of start looking around for somebody that is preferably knowledgeable in our local environmental conditions here in the channel. Next slide. All right, and then one of the bigger ones, so discussing kind of a larger policy efforts. So in any given year, we deal with maybe 1 or 2 of these large policy efforts. I preface this by saying that we are kind of already dealing with vessel insurance in our mooring fields, so those didn't show up on this list because we're kind of actively working on them. But all 7 harbor commissioners kind of provided input on this, and it was pretty unanimous, the top 3. So strategic master plan development, leasing policy review, and commercial fishing policy. So staff will kind of do our best to kind of get those on the calendar and start taking those on as our work tasks. Next slide. And so, yeah, just to sum up some possible policy work for 2025, continued efforts on vessel insurance, continued work on our mooring expansion, starting the process of developing a scope for a strategic or master plan update, reviewing our current leasing policy, and reviewing and revising commercial fishing policy. And so, goes without saying, those are big efforts. So the intention is not that we can knock all this out in 1 year and be done with it, but as an ongoing process, we can start sort of diving into these things. Next slide. Just for reference, here's our list from the 2024 priority setting workshop. So these were the larger policy efforts. One of the great takeaways on my end is that 2 of the top 3, we're kind of dealing with them and working on them right now. We've dealt with slip regulation policy, kind of in and out of it through terminations and discussions. Slip regulation policy didn't rank as high this year, but it was nice to see that we have kind of tackled some of the things on this list as we work through it. And even neater to see is the following priorities on the list are leasing and business strategy and commercial fishing policy. So it really does seem that we're kind of like somewhat working through these in order. Next slide. So text is super tiny on this, but just more for you to know that it exists. So this is a tentative calendar for our Harbor Commission agenda topics. We really try and kind of plan this out as best we can. They always shift a little bit based on timing and when we can get people, or policy stuff always is kind of a little bit squirrely. But just to note, the stuff that's in red is newly put on there. That was taken from after the strategic working or the prioritization workshop, and so that just shows that we're some placeholders to kind of grapple what we would like to tackle this coming year. And next slide, I think that's it. So with that, then, just a big thanks from staff. It's really helpful to hear your guys' discussion and kind of have a consolidated and clear way to build our calendar out for the year. So thanks for being willing to do that every year in addition to the regular Harbor Commission meetings.
Great, thanks Director Wiltshire, and thanks for putting on the agenda setting workshop for us. I know that was a big help, usually just to kind of set the year and get a full scope on everything. So also too, I know the tentative agenda topics, that's always really helpful because it kind of plans out our year too, just kind of see each individual month where we're going with some of the topics. Also too, just want to point out the guest speakers. I know usually those are very helpful. In the past, as Director Wiltshire was saying, Reed Baggiano came to us from State Lands, and if you remember, one of the top things we had on our agenda setting was coastal access. So it's always great to have a subject matter expert from one of those guest speakers to kind of answer any of the questions regarding that. So I know in the past, those have been very helpful. And with that, we'll take questions, and Commissioner Cohen.
Thank you. It was a helpful priority setting meeting. I just wanted to, I've sent you a couple of names in the past, and I can resend that to you on experts within our area that could speak about environmental impacts. Dr. Ryan Friedman is one that comes to mind at NOAA. There's also several people at UCSB that that could be helpful. So I'm going to just send you a few names later on tonight. Okay.
Much appreciated.
Great. Commissioner Anderson.
Thank you, Director. That was great to see last year's meeting and that we've tackled pretty much the top three. That's great to see. One question I had was, maybe it was a year or 18 months ago, you guys were looking into a new software kind of for the whole harbor to possibly switch to. And I was just wondering if you could speak if there's any update on that.
Yeah, so that would kind of fall in our capital improvements, money spent to sort of improve our operations. In short, yes, we went out to RFP. It's pretty specific software we're finding, and so we've been going through a number of iterations with different vendors to try and kind of maximize what we get. Our current software, marina management software, is working today. It's just like something that will eventually legacy out, and so it's still a pretty big priority for us to get that replaced. There is dollars set aside for that in our capital. It's just been harder to kind of make that relationship with a vendor for the services that we need. And so we're still kind of working through that with a few folks.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments regarding the prioritization workshop review? Oh, Commissioner Stedman.
Yeah, I have a quick question. So one of our city council members, Megan Harmon, is also on the Coastal Commission. Is it possible to have her give a presentation?
I can make the ask. I'm sure she would probably happily do that.
That would be fantastic.
Great, with no other questions, I believe we move on to the department update. Item number 5, Facilities Management Report.
Hello, Chair Stenwick and Commissioners and the public. My name is Brian Adair, Waterfront Facilities Manager. I'd like to give a report on Stearns Wharf in light of this Santa Cruz Wharf that had a recent incident. This is kind of a Google Earth picture. It kind of shows how Santa Barbara is to the entire West Coast. This is a close-up of Santa Barbara coastline that shows that it's nicely tucked away. As realtors say, location, location, location. Santa Barbara is south-facing. We have Point Conception is protecting us to the west, and we have Channel Islands providing protection to the south of us. Stearns Wharf is in a better position than our neighboring wharfs and piers. A much smaller swell exposure than other wharfs. We are vulnerable to westerly swells that are less frequent. I want to note that when we do have king high tides, as well as high swells, that compounds the problems and risk. Also, I always concerned about fires on Stearns Wharf. That's a very big problem that we try to pay attention to with Harbor Patrol and maintenance and other staff. Most recent historical fires is 1921, 1973, 1986, and 1988. More recent storm damages in 1983, 87, 2022, 2023. What this kind of represents is that over the years, the cost for storm damage repairs is going down, even though the wharf is getting older. And we can attribute this to the support of the commissioners, Mike Wiltshire and others. So we have a very healthy annual wharf maintenance budget of $1.85 million, of which $1.2 million goes to full-time maintenance staff and the operational expenses. And then we have routine capital maintenance and repair. We call the heavy timber projects every year of $0.65 million. What's not showing here is that we also have additional one-time intermittent capital projects to do repairs and upgrades on the Stearns Wharf. We currently have about 6 full-time maintenance staff. We also hire hourly employees from Santa Barbara City College, the divers, and we have some also part-time custodians and contractors. This is another table that shows you the quantity of materials that we're investing in and replacing on Stearns Wharf over the years. So the budget represents funding, and this represents actual work, boots on the ground. The first column is the number of piles that are cleaned and inspected. That's a very important routine task that we do, we're committed to, and the divers do a really good job for us. And you can see the number of piles, the average there, the second column. So we're staying ahead of the game and making sure that we maintain status quo. And for safety, we replace a lot of deck boards with the car vehicle tires turning on the wood. It kind of creates these divots, and for safety reasons, we try to change the deck boards more frequently. Any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Adair. Do we have any questions regarding the facilities management report? Commissioner Anderson.
How many piles approximately do we have on the wharf, or hold the wharf?
I'm going to say 2,300 is my memory. Yeah.
Thank you.
Commissioner Cohn?
You were saying that the cost of repairs after storms has gone down because of the maintenance. Has the maintenance then, I assume, has gone up considerably over the years, or our preventative maintenance to make sure everything's in order when we do have an event? So
I would say just the inflationary cost for labor and materials, but my assumption would be no. We're pretty efficient and maintaining our budget year to year.
the one expense that was on there, if you go back, let's see, a couple slides. Keep going, keep going. In 1983, the 500,000, can I ask what that was? Just seems.
As I was sitting here tonight, I thought maybe you'd ask that. I was going through some old news articles, and it was noted that it was 500,000, but I don't know the details of what makes up that 500,000. Of course, I wasn't here, but I can get that information to you if you wish.
I just wondered if we knew if it was a major event or not. So.
It was an El Nino year, and that was kind of the last storm on record that people had compared to the last couple years, and so that was a big year. So my guess is that it was like damaged piles and decking and some pretty substantial swell.
I'll say I was here, and it was a tremendous year. That was a very, very challenging winter. So hopefully it's rare.
I was a teacher at Laguna Blanca at the time, and the campus was underwater.
Commissioner McCray, did you have a question?
I do. So I saw that there was a notice put out that we're looking forward to a dredging cycle coming up.
That is correct. Yes, Pacific Dredge is here. They're mobilizing this week, and maybe by Friday or Saturday, they'll start dredging. We haven't got confirmation when the dredge will be up here from San Diego, weather permitting, of course, but they hope to start dredging like Friday afternoon, Friday night, or Saturday, if all goes well.
Thank you. I just wanted to give you a chance to say something about that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. That was good information. Any other questions regarding facilities? Oh, Commissioner Stone.
What is the status of the car crash on the wharf that happened the other day? Are all the repairs done, or?
Yeah, it was an unfortunate accident. It was due to kind of a health emergency. So a number of private vehicles were damaged, and then some of our infrastructure too. No, we haven't repaired everything yet, but our facilities crews is kind of inventorying it. It's mainly like wheel stops and some fence railing and stuff like that. So relatively superficial stuff that we can get repaired. There'll be some expense to it, but yeah, unfortunate incident.
Thanks.
Commissioner Nelson?
Brian, I'm trying to, you basically say our swells aren't that bad because of the protection we've got from, Point Conception in the north and the islands in the south. Yet I was told when we had the big, I guess it was 23, when we had the huge swells, that was the most devastation that I've seen since I've been a commissioner. So I guess I'm saying, is that the swell that we dealt with in, I guess it was 2023? Is that unusual, and we should never expect that to ever happen again? Because even though we're more protected than Santa Cruz, those existing swells that we're exposed to can, in fact, create real serious damage.
Yeah, I'd be happy to speak to that. I think it really boils down to just an understanding of swell direction. So we are quite sheltered by Point Conception. A lot of winter storms, typically in La Nina years, which are more common. They happen more to the north, up towards Alaska and off the coast of British Columbia. So if you draw a line from the center of that storm, that's typically a good way to gauge the swell angle. Right. Anything above sort of 300 degrees, where it will just wallop north of Point Conception. I mean, if you go to Halama, Santa Cruz, there'll be 20-foot waves, and there will be no waves here.
Right.
So it's not that they won't happen. Our swell angle is just much, much smaller. And so El Nino years, what typically happens is those storm systems move further south, which generates a more westerly swell. They are less frequent, but they do happen. And so those westerly swells kind of between that 255 and 290 degree window, that's when we feel the direct energy of those long period swells, where otherwise they would just kind of scoot past us down Point Conception. And from the south, we're lucky because there's a really small swell window from hurricanes off of the coast of Mexico, and it's almost like a southeasterly swell, and those will sneak right in between the islands and really hit Marina 4, really get into the marina. And so you look back at Hurricane Mary, which was kind of 5, 6, maybe more than that, huge waves here in the summer, which is very, very rare. And so our neighbors north of Point Conception and even kind of south of Ventura, there's just a much broader swell window that will hit them, so the frequency is more often.
Okay, thanks.
Commissioner McCray?
Yeah, I will note that the longer the swell period is, the more adept it is at rounding corners. So we get a lot of protection from the usual stuff, but if there's a really massive storm in the Pacific Northwest with a really long period swell, it has the potential to surprise us.
Thanks for that. Okay. Any other questions? I believe we can move on to department update, item number 6, the harbor operations report. Also, I believe we have public comment on this item, so we'll take the staff report first, we'll move to public comment, and then we'll open up to the commission.
Good evening, Chair Stanwyck, the Harbor Commission, and members of the public. Harbor Operations Manager Nathan Aldridge, and to wrap up our meeting, I'll be presenting this evening's Harbor Operations Report. The Harbor Patrol officers regularly patrol the marina and docks, keeping a close eye on the condition of all boats in the harbor. Vessels that show signs of neglect are concerned for numerous reasons. So maintaining a vessel in a proper working order protects against a host of hazardous conditions. And some signs of neglect could be deteriorating lines, large amount of water in the bilge, excessive growth, substandard power cords, or presence of mold or mildew on a vessel. So if an officer observes a vessel that appears to meet these criteria, they attempt to contact the owner and pass on their observations to Waterfront Administration. Additionally, Waterfront occasionally receives complaints from neighboring slips regarding the poor state of a vessel or a slip space. The department may send a letter to the slip permittee notifying them of the vessel's condition. For vessels that appear inoperable, the slip permittee is given a 15-day window per the Santa Barbara Municipal Code to prove operability. And to give some perspective, approximately 15 to 20 of these letters are sent out each year, and the vast majority being promptly resolved. The Harbors Navigation Code, Title 14, Section 6550.5, subsection E, specifies vessel inspection or termination authority. So a harbor patrol officer may remove from the water or terminate the voyage of a vessel under any of these unseaworthy conditions. If a vessel is unsuitable, unsafe, a risk to life, limb, or property, if it poses an environmental hazard, if the hull or deck is in disrepair, is it delaminating or decomposing, the vessel is taking on water or not watertight, it may sink or capsize from water intrusion. So this discretion is some of the sort of spirit of the law versus the letter of the law. Officers do all they can to work with the vessel owner before impounding a vessel or moving to terminate a slip permit. So a vessel is assigned to a slip permit, in addition to all other vessels in the waterfront district, must be continuously maintained in an operable condition. And once again, Harbor Patrol officers regularly check on the condition of vessels, and vessels believed to be inoperable or neglected are sent notice to remediate. So in addition to Harbor Patrol officers, per the municipal code, the waterfront director has the authority to determine if a sunken, submerged, or badly deteriorated vessel or property of any kind is unseaworthy or is a menace to navigation. It is then the responsibility of the vessel owner to prove operability or remedy the area of concern. So in a slip, it could be excessive growth, bird droppings, or mold. And for inoperable vessels that have failed to prove operability within the 15-day period after having received an operability notice, the slip permit may be terminated and the vessel may be removed from the harbor. So for impounded vessels, any vessel that's berthed, docked, moored, or anchored in the harbor district in violation of the Santa Barbara Municipal Code may be impounded. Not all municipal code violations lead to impound. Most impounds are for non-permission to moor, non-payment of slip fees, or a vessel that's left either illegally abandoned in the seasonal anchorage after a winter closure. Boaters sometimes deliberately violate harbor rules in an attempt to overstay a visit, to violate a non-permission to moor order, or attempt to moor a vessel without paying. Vessels may be released from impound when all associated fees are paid and the violation is corrected. Impounded vessels that are unclaimed after 30 days are declared abandoned per California law and then move through the disposal process. So as we move further into the winter season, it's critical for boat owners to keep a close eye on their vessels. In cases of an unseaworthy or inoperable vessel, it's important to note that when a violation has reached the point of slip termination, the slip permittee has been given many opportunities to correct the issue. Ultimately, slip terminations are a rare but important element in enforcing our harbor's rules and regulations. As we look forward to several more months of winter weather and storms, staff would like to remind all boaters to check on their vessels and ensure that they are regularly maintained and in good working order. So to close, I would like to compliment the efforts of both Harbor Patrol officers and our waterfront staff who do an excellent job of keeping our harbor a clean and safe place for all to enjoy. And this concludes this evening's operations report, and I'm happy to take any questions from the commission.
Great, thank you, Mr. Aldridge. Okay, let's go to public comment right now, and then we'll take questions. So, Mr. Lopez, I believe we do have a speaker slip for public comment.
Yes, we have one speaker slip, Charles Lara.
Great.
Hello.
Welcome, Mr. Lara.
Thank you for having me up here. I just wanted to come up and put my 2 cents in on this whole thing. First, I want to start out with, I got 2 minutes, so I'll make it quick. I want to start out with, I've been in the harbor for approximately 49 years. I've lived on a boat in the marina for 49 years, or thereabouts. I am a commercial diver. I am a commercial fisherman. I worked as a captain on a government research vessel out of Santa Barbara Harbor. The Shearwater belongs to NOAA. Did that for 12 and a half years. My biggest concern with this whole program that they've got, the operability program, is it's ambiguous to what they want. They'll present something to the public, myself being one of the public. They'll present it, yet it's unclear as to what they're looking for. Inoperability, I don't understand what the qualifications that they have are to actually claim that they're qualified to say my vessel is inoperable. It's confusing at this point. You go up and you ask, what makes my vessel inoperable? What makes you think my vessel is inoperable? They don't give you a direct answer. They send out basically form letters, and it just seems arbitrary and ambiguous to what they really want from this. So I'd like a clearer picture of what they're looking for. I have a sailboat. My boat has sails. They're intact. They're ready to go if I want to go sailing. If you want to come down, I'll hire somebody to come and take you out. I don't take my boat out that much. I work on the ocean already. It's there because I use it for certain things. It doesn't look that bad. Thank you.
Great, thank you. We appreciate the comments. Okay, we'll move on to questions. Vice Chair Ford.
Thank you so much. Thanks for this comprehensive report. I just have one question about one sentence and wonder if you could elaborate a little bit on it. It is the sentence that says, officers often attempt to contact the owner of a vessel in violation before it's impounded, but that is not always possible, practical, or warranted. I was just wondering, I can understand possible, but practical or warranted, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, thank you, Vice Chair Ford. An example that comes to mind is if a vessel is left unattended, moored on a walkway, and there's no ability to contact the owner of record. So we may have contact information for slip permittees in a harbor, and people have a mooring permit, but oftentimes a visiting boater or someone coming in from outside of the area, if they leave a vessel up on the walkway somewhere, boats have registration, but we may not know who that person is or have a phone number for that individual. And so if that vessel's left and it exceeds the municipal code time limit for a tie-up, it could be half an hour, 2 hours or so, a vessel may be impounded until that person comes back and then says, where's my boat? And then we can contact them. So that'd be an example I would think of.
And just to add to that, Commissioner Ford, something where it may not be warranted is if there's an emergency situation. So if somebody abandons a boat or anchors it in the federal channel, we're not going to spend time trying to contact the owner. We're going to impound that boat and deal with the safety issue first. And so there may be conditions where we just don't have time, or it's impractical or unwarranted to try and chase somebody down. And that may well be an emergency situation. Less frequent, but that would be an example.
Sure. Both good examples, thank you.
Commissioner McCray.
Yeah, I want to first say that I pushed my button to speak before Captain Lara came up here and presented. And what caught my attention was that, you know, the words that you had, completely agree. Boats should be operable. But at the same time, the images that you showed, I looked at those and I thought, those are cosmetics. And I was just wondering and hoping that people didn't end up getting a bunch of letters because the aesthetics, the cosmetics of their vessels caused you to look at that boat and say, hey, the guy's not taking care of it, probably doesn't even work. And I'm hoping that you're more careful about sending out a bunch of letters to people and causing them to go to a bunch of work and be stressed out about the fact that they haven't been able to get down to the boat and clean the bird poop off of it in the last 3 or 4 weeks or whatever it might be.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner McCray. I think if an officer were here, they would say there's a fairly clear separation between someone who hasn't, cleared some droppings off in, 3 or 4 weeks and a vessel that looks like it hasn't been attended to in several years. If you look at the hull, or you look at an outdrive or a keel that is covered in heavy or excessive growth, that generally is the trigger of, no one's been operating this vessel or come down to check on this for quite some time. And then the onus is on the slip permittee to come down and prove that boat is operable. And if a letter reaches someone and they say, yeah, I haven't been down in my boat for 2 years or something, that is a problem. We've had issues with rodents on vessels, that have not been attended to for quite some time. And so there's not one of those triggers. I think I listed several of them that seems it's a collection where if an officer comes and looks at that, they'll try to make a phone call. And oftentimes people are actually very thankful. They say, hey, I'm really glad that you gave me a call. I had been meaning to come down and check on my boat, or I need to replace my lines. I really appreciate it. I'm going to come get my captain to come down and do that. And just in the last month or so, anecdotally, we've had several slip permittees call the office and thank the waterfront on behalf of their neighbors for coming down to attend to their boats that were prompted by some of these phone calls they gotten from some of the harbor patrol officers.
Well, that's a kind of a relief. I mean, I would love to get a phone call if I had a boat there and the lines were near parting. After a big swell or surge event or something like that, somebody told me that was the case. What does say a person gets a letter saying, hey, you need to prove your boat is operable. What do they need to do?
Yeah, thank you. And coming back to the question of the public comment, I respectfully disagree. I think the criteria is very clear, and it's spelled out in our municipal code, which is also included in the letter. And so I can read off the operability. The definition in our muni code is a vessel's ability to maneuver safely under its own power from any place in the harbor district to areas within the open waters of the Pacific Ocean and back to its point of origin. So that's what it says in our municipal code. And what we'll end up having a boat owner, a slip permittee do is come to the courtesy dock, and then they will proceed out of the harbor, generally around the bell buoy, the number 1 buoy, and then back to the courtesy dock. And if they're able to do that safely, and it doesn't fall afoul any of those harbor's navigation violations or the criteria I said before, then it passes operability.
Thank you. And so even like those craft that look like they're more like houses than boats, they're able to do that?
And if you look at our municipal code, the one exception is, I think vessels, I have to double check, it's either prior to 1980, it's either 1983 or 1980, that were not operable during that time, are exempt from this operability requirement. And they're now, at this point in time, after gosh, 40 years or so, there are very few vessels that meet that criteria, most of them which are floating, they're designated as floating structures.
I believe there are 4, just to put it into some like scale. I think there's 4 vessels, floating objects that are not beholden to the operability requirement.
Thank you very much for that clarity. It's very helpful.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Commissioner McCray. Commissioner Cohn.
Thank you for the presentation. There's been a couple of times where we've had members of the public come in who have obviously received that letter and talk to us. And obviously, it's a long path before anything gets to the commission to be decided on any slips. And so I'm just wondering if that communication or that letter is really clear, or as to who you should be working with, because, I'm just wondering, if there's any improvement we could make in that process.
When I got down here, I evaluated that, and to put it into a little bit of perspective as well, I think it's very, very clear because the numbers kind of dictate that. And so Mr. Aldridge said at any given time we have a dozen of these operability issues going. 99% of the time they're resolved, and they're resolved amicably, and that issue is resolved. It takes a lot for a slip to get to the point where it's terminated or to where we're even like engaging in that process. At a really high level, we're tasked with making sure that vessels in our harbor are operable. I think that's a very, very important thing for a harbor, and going the other direction is really, really a slippery slope. And so how we do that, we try and take it as seriously as we can, but have sort of a light touch with it as well. And so can letters be wordsmith? These letters have been wordsmithed over decades and decades and decades to become as clear as possible on where you'd need to go, what the operability requirements are. And so the numbers tell the tale for me that we're constantly resolving these. They're good news scenarios. Like to Nathan's point, we call somebody, they don't respond, call somebody, we issue a letter that somehow they get it, oh my gosh, come down, they handle it, and it's resolved, and we now have an operable boat within the harbor. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it just was an observation because we've had people come in before with the letter in hand and, thinking that this was maybe the place, or I don't know if maybe they just, wanted to communicate directly with the commission, but it just, yeah, that was just something I've noticed. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I just want to say, there's a major difference between just a boat that doesn't look nice and an unoperable boat. And we can't discriminate, obviously, against ugly boats. But, I live in the harbor. I see boats like that all the time. And if they're operable, that's what we want. We want a working harbor. I mean, we've talked about this at the Harbor Commission. A working harbor is boats that are operating within that jurisdiction. And I just think that's a good thing that we do, and I mean, we should enforce this. Also, too, thanks for describing the operability test. I think that's important just so we know and we kind of get a feel of what it actually is. But also, too, can you put a time frame on, like, how long does that take? Is that like a 15-minute thing? Do you have to pre-schedule that? Or, I'm just thinking for somebody who does get one of these letters, they just show up and do it, 15 minutes, you're done, or what's the time frame on that?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Stanwyck. Generally, a boat owner will contact the office and say, I'm going to come down tomorrow. I'd like to prove my operability. And you say, great, why don't you just hail the Harbor Patrol on Channel 12 once you're kind of coming into the dock. And then unless they're tied up on an emergency or emergent call, very rare occasions they may have to wait several minutes until the officers respond back to the office. But it's generally quick. If the boat is in good working order and it is able to maneuver safely under its own power, that is a very quick process. It's about 15 minutes or so, and then they're on their way. That letter's tucked away in their file, and then they're in good standing again.
Great. Thanks for the clarification, Mr. Aldridge. Any other questions regarding vessel operability? Okay. We'll move on to the commission and staff communications. Director Wiltshire, do we have any staff communications for this evening?
Just an update, there's a lot of activity in the harbor itself right now. We had a crane down there yesterday with some fencing replacing 2 piles on the travel lift pier. So the yacht club is replacing their hoist on that pier, and we took the opportunity to replace some deck boards and some structural piles. And then we also are just getting underway with the Divers Monument project, so you'll see some fencing in that breakwater area over there as well. So it's been kind of a construction inundated couple days down there. And that's it.
Great, thanks for the updates. Any commission communications or updates?
I have a question.
Yep.
Committee Chair Nelson, what's on board for the CSFB work group?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question. Mr. Stedman, be happy to answer it. At the prioritization meeting, Commissioner Anderson asked a question about, are we doing anything with SBCC, the community college? And the answer is there's a lot going on there. As you'll recall, the City Council asked that we look into the problem associated with no gear, boat, or cold storage. And because basically in 1996, the master plan said there was a need for gear, boat, and cold storage. So the Harbor Commission took a look at it, and then that led to a presentation that we're going to have to buy private property to solve this problem. And obviously private property in Santa Barbara is hugely expensive. So when we went back to the City Council to report that, the response was, let's give, basically CFSB gave a presentation that they would take a shot at trying to solve this problem. And the council in 2020 basically said, okay, go ahead. But also, because it was in the middle of the pandemic, they said, why can't we promote the seafood industry and maritime industries as part of this project? And so what has occurred at SBCC is to address both of those. SBCC has provided a piece of property for us to look at. We used funds that were provided by the Waterfront Department to do a feasibility study. Was there problems with this property going forward with that? The answer was there are none. And the new president of the community college is willing to make that available, but wants to add on to that to do more than just have a gear, boat, and cold storage area. They want to have workshops and labs and all of that to pursue a program of ocean careers. And it's right at the location of this, is right at the Marine Diving Technology Building on Loma Alta Drive. So what you have is a workforce development project that will do training and do courses for maritime trades in the blue economy, but you also have a problem that's been a problem since 1996 being addressed. So that's the good news. And so the issue, I guess, for us is to report back to the City Council where we are. And recently, I'm proud to say, I consulted with, as you'll remember, Council members Jordan and Council member Friedman were assigned to provide oversight, and they were assigned to the Commercial Fisheries Subcommittee at the time to make sure this got done, to make sure that we found property and tried to promote the seafood industry. And so recently, as a result of a conversation I had with those two, I told them that we were applying for a $250,000 grant. SBCC and CFSB would be applying for this grant, and the response we got was, what can we do to help? And the Waterfront Department, the new city manager, provided immediate response to take care of us. And it was a real tight deadline. So in the middle of December, we were able to file an application for $250,000, and we're supposed to hear by the end of February. So one of the things that I'm sensitive about is the money. And so when that was approved back in 2020, the city council said, we want to help you with your grant program. And so we would be willing to provide the matching grant that's often required with a federal or a state application. And $25,000 was initially appropriated as that match, and then $50,000. So that $75,000 contribution potentially will bring us in $350,000, and we were allowed to use it on the engineering study for the property that has determined that this is a viable spot for a yard. So there is real progress, and the solution is one that I'm particularly proud of, is because the seafood and maritime industries, they like to go to a national conference called the Pacific Marine Expo. And the Pacific Marine Expo had a showcase on workforce development and economic development projects and how it can affect maritime industries. And our project was selected as one of those. There were speakers from all over the nation, and I had the good fortune to represent the Commission and CFSB in Seattle literally just 2 months ago, and it was reported in the National Fisherman magazine. And Director Wilshire sent us a note advising us that there was a national working waterfront conference being held in San Diego at the beginning of February, and Kim Selko, the executive director of CFSB, has been asked to speak on a national panel about our project with SBCC. So there's real progress, and it's the kind of progress that's getting us a lot of, I think, very good attention. Thank you for the question, Commissioner Stebbins.
I have
You're welcome.
one more. I'm going to put a point on this. Thursday the 23rd, what's going on?
Thursday the 23rd, as part of when we started the project, it was the Maritime Collective that would just focus on maritime industries. But what's happened is when it's become a blue economy focus and ocean industries, and UCSB and its Nano Institute approached CFSB and said, could we possibly schedule a summit or a meeting where scientists that are working on research could actually talk to commercial fishermen to make sure that any research they're doing, there's an opportunity maybe to refine it. And one particular research person at UCSB, her name is Ashlyn Santoro, is created a bait box that's made out of a material produced on a printer that is made of a bacteria that consumes itself when it's put in water, and it does it very slowly. So you have this, biodegradable bait box as opposed to the material becoming marine debris. So the idea is to bring the scientists together with the entrepreneurs and business people to see if there can be a spark between them. And the attendance is now at roughly 100 people are going to be there on Thursday, and I hope that means you're going to be there too, Mayor.
So I have here on my schedule that there's a Blue Economy Summit starting at 3 o'clock, and you have to get online and make a reservation to participate in this.
I think I can. That was the intent, to know who was going to be there. But if you can make it, I'll be certain to make sure that you're allowed in.
All right, I just wanted to give you an opportunity to provide a plug for people to be part of that.
Part of the
Thanks, guys.
idea of an ocean collective is not just the courses and not just infrastructure, but also something that's very popular now. It's basically cross-sector collaboration as a way of creating, innovative solutions to problems. And so UCSB said, can we help you? Can we participate? And we said, absolutely.
Great. Thanks for the communication, guys. All right, before we wrap up, I know in December meeting, right before we left, we had the Parade of Lights, so just kind of wanted to highlight that. It was a huge success. So thanks again to the Waterfront for putting that on. Huge community event, great part of Santa Barbara. So thanks to the staff. And also, if you've ever been out on one of those Parade of Lights, just kudos to the Harbor Patrol, because as we don't know, they have to navigate in the dark, 20, 30, 40 boats through a minefield of lobster traps from the yacht club all the way to East Beach to the wharf for the enjoyment of all the public. So thanks to them for doing that, because it was a great event. Also, too, I just wanted to note that we didn't have our meeting in December, and I had a chance to attend a few of the other boards and commission meetings that are in Santa Barbara. I attended the Historic Landmarks Commission as well as the Street Tree Advisory Commission, and just kind of seeing how they do business and how they operate in their in their right. And looking back at everything, there's really nothing that I would change. I think we do a great job here. So just thanks to everybody and all the hard work we do. So we're efficient and organized.
Good job, Adam.
Yeah. And with that, we move on to the final part, adjournment. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
We have a motion to adjourn and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any abstentions? Any opposed? Meeting adjourned. Thank you all.